Before we start the video, I'd like to ask you for a quick favor. This channel is new and we're just getting started, so your subscription means a lot and helps us keep bringing more content here. Click subscribe here on the channel. Your support is really important so we can keep posting more story-based videos here on YouTube. The air over Europe was thick with tension in the early 1940s. Every sortie, every dogfight, and every thunderous roar of a fighter's engine brought with it the possibility of death or glory. Amid the swirling smoke of aerial duels and the shrieking of machine guns, a young man from Pennsylvania rose to prominence, etching his name among the greatest fighter aces of the Second World War. Francis "Gabby" Gabreski was not just another pilot, he was a symbol of American tenacity, courage, and exceptional skill. Born on January 28, 1919, in Oil City, Pennsylvania, Gabreski was the son of Polish immigrants. His childhood was shaped by strong cultural roots and a deep admiration for aviation. As a young man, he was inspired by the exploits of World War I pilots and the romanticism of flight. His passion for the skies led him to enroll at the University of Notre Dame, where he joined the Reserve Officers Training Corps. But Gabreski's path to becoming an ace was far from smooth. In fact, he almost didn't become a pilot at all. Initially considered an average cadet with little natural flying ability, Gabreski had to fight hard to stay in the program. He graduated from flying school in March 1941 and received his wings and commission as a second lieutenant. Just 6 months later, the world would change dramatically. The attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941 thrust the United States into the heart of World War II, and Gabreski found himself at the crossroads of history. Assigned first to Hawaii, Gabreski flew P-36 Hawks and P-40 Warhawks with the 45th Pursuit Squadron, guarding against potential follow-up attacks. But what would ultimately shape his destiny was his fluency in Polish and his Polish-American heritage. In late 1942, Gabreski was selected to serve as a liaison with the Polish pilots flying with the Royal Air Force in Britain. These men, hardened by the fall of Poland and desperate to strike back at the Axis, had become a formidable force in the air. Gabreski joined the No. 315, Polish, Squadron RAF, flying the legendary Supermarine Spitfire. It was during this period that he began to sharpen his combat instincts and study the tactics of experienced Allied pilots. Flying missions over occupied France, he saw firsthand what it meant to engage in aerial warfare. Though he was technically still a liaison officer, Gabreski convinced his superiors to allow him to fly combat sorties, and it didn't take long for him to earn their respect. By the time he transitioned to the United States Army Air Force's 56th Fighter Group in early 1943, Gabreski was already seasoned and determined. The 56th, flying the powerful P-47 Thunderbolt, was one of the premier units of the 8th Air Force, tasked with escorting heavy bombers deep into enemy territory and engaging the formidable Luftwaffe fighters in their own skies. It was in this unforgiving crucible that Gabreski would make his mark. The P-47 Thunderbolt, often called the Jug for its stubby appearance, was not as nimble as the German Bf-109 or Fw-190 at lower altitudes, but it was incredibly tough, fast in a dive, and heavily armed. Gabreski quickly adapted his flying style to maximize the Jug's strengths. He learned to fight with aggression, to strike from high altitude, and to disengage when necessary, a critical skill in surviving air combat. Gabreski's first confirmed victory came on August 24, 1943, during a bomber escort mission over France. As the formation neared enemy territory, they were jumped by a large force of Focke-Wulf Fw-190s. Gabreski dove into the fray with little hesitation. Amid the chaos of twisting aircraft and tracers, he locked onto an Fw-190 and sent it plummeting to Earth in flames. It was the beginning of a legendary tally. Over the following months, Gabreski's kill count steadily grew. He developed a reputation as a patient but deadly hunter. He often led his squadron with calm authority, scanning the skies and watching for the slightest movement or glint of sunlight off a canopy. He credited much of his success to situational awareness, quick decision-making, and teamwork. But there was also something else, something intangible, that set him apart: his refusal to back down. The Luftwaffe, though still dangerous, was beginning to feel the strain. Allied bombers had turned the tide of war in the air, but German aces still dominated certain sectors. For Gabreski, these dogfights were more than just missions, they were personal challenges. He didn't just want to survive, he wanted to face the best pilots the Luftwaffe had to offer and come out on top. Gabreski's greatest strength may have been his understanding of air combat, not as a display of brute force, but as a chess match fought at 400 miles per hour. He once said that the key to survival and success in air combat was to shoot him before he shoots you, a deceptively simple mantra that reflected his razor-sharp focus. By the summer of 1944, Gabreski had become the leading American ace in the European theater with 28 confirmed aerial victories. His leadership and combat skills made him a legend within the 56th Fighter Group, and his name was often mentioned with admiration in pilots' briefings. Even among the aces of the day, Gabreski stood out not just for his kill tally but for the respect he earned from those who flew beside him. On July 20, 1944, he was scheduled to return to the United States for a war bond tour. Wanting one more mission, he took off on a ground attack sortie over German-occupied France. While strafing an airfield, his P-47's propeller clipped the ground during a low pass. He crash-landed and was captured by German forces, spending the remainder of the war as a prisoner of war in Stalag Luft I. Even in captivity, Gabreski's legend grew. He remained defiant and disciplined, boosting morale among fellow prisoners. When the camp was liberated in 1945, he returned home as a hero, America's top fighter ace in Europe. When Francis "Gabby" Gabreski returned home after the war, he was already a household name. He had racked up 28 confirmed kills in the skies over Europe, leading bomber escort missions and engaging enemy aircraft with a precision that few could match. In the eyes of the American public, he was a hero, a living embodiment of the grit and courage that had brought victory in the air war. But for Gabreski, life as a civilian hero didn't sit comfortably for long. His passion for flight and his sense of duty had not faded with the end of World War II. As the Cold War dawned and geopolitical tensions mounted, Gabreski returned to active duty in the newly established United States Air Force. By the early 1950s, the world was once again at war, this time on the Korean Peninsula. The Korean War presented a vastly different air war from what Gabreski had faced over Europe. The introduction of jet-powered aircraft changed the dynamics of combat entirely. But once again, Gabreski stepped forward, ready to meet the challenge. He joined the 4th Fighter Interceptor Wing, based in South Korea, and was soon flying the F-86 Sabre, a sleek, fast jet designed to counter the Soviet-built MiG-15s that dominated the skies over North Korea. The MiG-15 was agile, heavily armed, and flown by skilled North Korean, Chinese, and even Soviet pilots. It was a formidable opponent. But Gabreski, though older than many of the other pilots, brought with him a combat instinct honed in the propeller-driven wars of the 1940s. He adapted quickly to jet-age warfare. The transition from the rugged P-47 to the modern F-86 Sabre was not without its challenges. Jets demanded a new kind of flying, faster reactions, smoother control, and an even greater awareness of energy management. Gabreski, however, proved that a true fighter pilot is defined not by the aircraft he flies, but by the mindset he carries into battle. He studied the behavior of MiG pilots, learned their attack patterns, and taught his wingmen how to exploit their weaknesses. Between July 1951 and May 1952, Gabreski scored 6.5 confirmed aerial victories in Korea, bringing his overall tally to 34.5 kills, making him one of the few American pilots to become an ace in both World War II and the Korean War. His skill and determination inspired a new generation of jet-age aviators. And while some may have expected the older ace to be cautious or past his prime, Gabreski defied expectations, often leading his men from the front. Perhaps even more impressive than his kills was the way he mentored younger pilots. Gabreski understood that aerial warfare had become more technical, more reliant on radar, avionics, and precise coordination. But he never abandoned the fundamentals of dogfighting: anticipation, position, discipline, and control of the engagement. He emphasized the importance of mutual support in the air and pushed his squadrons to operate with cohesion. Gabreski's time in Korea also reflected his growth as a leader. No longer the young gun seeking to prove himself, he was now a seasoned commander. His reputation earned him the command of the 51st Fighter Interceptor Wing, one of the most effective jet fighter groups in the theater. His leadership helped maintain air superiority in the region, preventing enemy aircraft from interfering with Allied ground operations. Outside the cockpit, Gabreski remained deeply respected. He was known for his strong moral compass, discipline, and insistence on high standards. While he demanded excellence, he also cared for the well-being of his men. He believed in the power of preparation and was often found in the briefing room late into the night, reviewing maps, tactics, and after-action reports. He understood that every decision he made as a commander could mean the difference between life and death. After returning from Korea, Gabreski continued to serve with distinction in the U.S. Air Force. He took on a variety of leadership roles, including working with Air Defense Command and Strategic Air Command. His insights into aerial strategy, pilot training, and aircraft development helped shape U.S. air doctrine during the Cold War. Even as newer aircraft like the F-100 Super Sabre and F-4 Phantom II entered service, Gabreski remained closely involved in adapting training to match the pace of technology. In 1967, after more than 26 years of military service, Francis Gabreski retired from the Air Force with the rank of colonel. He had flown hundreds of combat missions across 2 major wars, survived captivity, and mentored countless pilots. But his influence didn't end with retirement. Gabreski continued to be an active figure in aviation circles, attending reunions, speaking at schools, and participating in veterans organizations. Perhaps the most enduring part of Gabreski's legacy was his unwavering belief in the importance of preparation, focus, and humility. Despite his fame, he remained grounded. He never glorified war and often spoke of the losses suffered, the friends he'd left behind, and the responsibilities carried by those who survived. He understood that behind every kill mark painted on an aircraft's fuselage was a human story, often one that ended in tragedy. In 1970, his legacy was formally honored when the Suffolk County Air Force Base in West Hampton Beach, New York, was renamed Francis S. Gabreski Airport. It was a fitting tribute to a man who had spent his life chasing the skies. Today, the airport remains a reminder of Gabreski's contributions to American aviation and national defense. But beyond the medals, awards, and airfields that bear his name, Francis "Gabby" Gabreski's real legacy lies in the stories told by those who served with him. They speak of a man who was calm under fire, bold in combat, and deeply committed to those around him. They tell tales of a pilot who could read the sky like a map, anticipate enemy moves with uncanny precision, and lead his wingmen to safety even in the most chaotic air battles. Gabreski's story is one of transformation, from a struggling cadet to a double ace, from a warrior to a mentor. And above all, his journey reflects a simple truth, that greatness in the sky begins with strength of character on the ground. As time moved forward and jet fighters evolved into supersonic marvels of engineering, the world Gabreski had dominated with his P-47 and F-86 slowly faded into memory. Yet the stories of those earlier days, days when pilots looked their enemy in the eye, when split-second decisions meant the difference between triumph and death, continued to be passed down through generations of aviators. Gabreski's name lived on not because of mythology, but because of the real lessons his career had offered. One of the most enduring lessons Gabreski shared was that no success in aerial combat came from luck alone. He believed strongly in discipline, preparation, and what he called combat mindset. His victories were not random, each was the result of practice, positioning, and his ability to stay calm even in the fiercest of battles. He emphasized to young pilots that the key to survival and victory in combat was the ability to anticipate and act decisively, not emotionally. His style of flying, while aggressive, was not reckless. He didn't rush into combat for glory. He picked his moments, read enemy movements, and waited for the perfect opportunity to strike. In combat, he was analytical and calculating, traits that made him a deadly opponent and a respected tactician among his peers. These instincts had served him well over Europe and again in Korea, and he believed they were teachable to any pilot willing to work hard enough. Gabreski was also a vocal advocate for technological innovation in aviation. He supported the ongoing development of radar-guided weapons, jet propulsion advances, and cockpit automation, believing that the future of aerial warfare would rely not just on the pilot's skills, but on how well that pilot could work with his machine. Still, he never let the technology overshadow the pilot. "It's still the man behind the stick that counts," he would say. By the 1970s and 80s, Gabreski was often invited to speak at air shows, military academies, and aviation symposiums. He became a living link to the past, a man who had fought against the Luftwaffe's best aces and later gone toe-to-toe with MiG pilots in the early days of the Cold War. When he spoke, audiences listened, not just because of his record, but because of the clarity and humility with which he told his story. In many of his talks, he recounted the mission that nearly cost him his life, the July 20, 1944, strafing run in which his P-47 crashed in German-held France. That moment, he said, was when he learned the true meaning of resilience. Trapped behind enemy lines, hunted by German soldiers, and eventually captured, Gabreski survived the final year of the war in a prisoner of war camp. It was, he admitted, the most difficult period of his life. He was no longer a combat pilot. He was powerless, a prisoner, his fate controlled by others. But he didn't give up. He remained focused, cooperative with fellow prisoners, and helped maintain morale. When liberation finally came in April 1945, Gabreski walked out not as a broken man, but as a survivor. That year in captivity had reshaped his sense of what true strength meant, not just skill with a fighter aircraft, but endurance, hope, and inner calm. These qualities would later influence his approach to leadership. During his time commanding units in the U.S. Air Force, Gabreski worked hard to develop the confidence and character of the officers under him. He insisted on accountability, but also taught his teams how to manage fear, make fast decisions, and recover quickly from mistakes. He wanted every pilot to walk into battle knowing exactly what to do, and what kind of person they needed to be under fire. Despite his growing status as a legend, Gabreski remained approachable. He told stories with laughter, paid close attention to the young men and women who came to meet him, and treated even strangers with a kind of respectful curiosity. To those who flew with him in the 56th Fighter Group or the 51st Wing, he was Gabby, a fearless, dependable leader. To his family, he was a devoted husband and father who had learned, through war and peace, how precious life truly was. Though his days in the cockpit were behind him, Gabreski's work was far from over. In the 1980s and 90s, he was involved in various veterans initiatives and helped push for better support systems for those returning from service. He also took part in commemorative events honoring the Polish pilots of World War II, never forgetting his roots or the bond he had formed with the Polish airmen who had helped shape his early career. He remained proud of his Polish heritage, often expressing his gratitude for the chance to represent both his country and his culture in the fight for freedom. That connection, forged over the skies of Europe, remained with him for the rest of his life. In interviews and speeches, he often paid tribute to the bravery and sacrifice of the Polish squadrons, insisting they never received the full recognition they deserved. His own story, meanwhile, was gaining renewed attention. Documentaries, books, and articles highlighted his role in aerial combat and his dual status as an ace in both World War II and Korea. While many American pilots had become aces during World War II, far fewer could claim victories in two wars, and almost none had fought both the Luftwaffe and Soviet-designed jets. This unique place in aviation history made Gabreski an invaluable voice in discussions about air power, strategy, and the evolution of flight. But Gabreski himself never sought fame. He didn't boast of his victories or keep score for glory. To him, each mission was about doing a job, protecting the bombers, defending his wingmen, surviving the engagement, and making it back. In his own words, "You never fought for medals. You fought to get home." This quiet sense of purpose, combined with unmatched talent, is what made Gabreski a true ace, not just by numbers, but by heart. His calm demeanor, fierce skill, and refusal to let fame inflate his ego created a role model that endured long after his final landing. In many ways, Gabreski's career was a mirror of 20th-century air combat, beginning in the era of piston-driven dogfights and ending in the world of supersonic jets and nuclear deterrence. He was not just a witness to history, he was one of its authors. In the final decades of his life, Francis Gabreski remained a prominent figure in American aviation history. He had lived through the most transformative era of air warfare, from open cockpit biplanes to supersonic jet fighters, and had left his mark in every chapter. But as the years went on, his role shifted from fighter ace to elder statesman. He became a keeper of stories, a mentor of legacy, and a voice for those who had never made it home. Retirement didn't dull his energy. Gabreski continued to participate in air shows, speak at military bases, and advocate for veterans' welfare. Always humble, he used his platform to elevate the memory of others, those who had fought beside him, those who hadn't returned, and especially the unsung pilots of the Allied nations. Whether talking to an audience of seasoned officers or curious schoolchildren, Gabreski carried himself with a quiet dignity and a powerful message that freedom is fragile, and the cost of preserving it is high. Despite his reputation, Gabreski never considered himself invincible. He frequently acknowledged the narrow margins of survival in combat. He had seen too many gifted pilots fall victim to a burst of cannon fire or a moment of distraction. That awareness kept him grounded, and it formed a central part of how he talked about war, as something brutal, necessary, and deeply personal, not something to be romanticized. One of the ways his legacy was most visibly honored came in the 1990s, when the U.S. Air Force inducted him into the National Aviation Hall of Fame. This recognition placed him among the greatest names in aviation history, pilots, engineers, and pioneers whose contributions shaped the skies. But even among that distinguished group, Gabreski stood out as one of the few who had succeeded as both a combat leader and a cultural icon, bridging generations through service, skill, and character. He also found himself the subject of several books and documentaries, with historians and aviation experts eager to explore his life in detail. His family, friends, and fellow pilots shared stories, some harrowing, some humorous, about the man behind the legend. One story told how Gabreski, after a rough landing in a damaged P-47, casually climbed out, brushed himself off, and said, "That wasn't my best landing, but I'll take it." Another recounted how he once flew nearly 300 miles with a hole in his wing and oil spraying across his windshield, navigating by memory, instinct, and sheer will. These stories weren't just anecdotes, they were part of a larger portrait of resilience. Gabreski's legacy wasn't built solely on how many planes he shot down, it was in how he carried himself through war and peace, in the way he balanced toughness with compassion, and in how he inspired generations to aim higher. His health began to decline in the late 1990s, and on January 31, 2002, just 3 days after his 83rd birthday, Francis Gabreski passed away. His death marked the end of an era, but not the end of his impact. Across the country, obituaries and tributes poured in, not just from military circles, but from communities, aviation museums, and even international allies who had remembered him from his time in Europe. Today, his name lives on in multiple ways. The Francis S. Gabreski Airport in West Hampton Beach, New York, continues to operate as a tribute to his service and to those who served with him. His aircraft, the P-47 Thunderbolt HVA, is replicated in museums and model kits around the world. His story is taught in Air Force history courses, and his quotes, sharp, insightful, and often laced with humor, still circulate among pilot training programs. Perhaps most importantly, Gabreski's career continues to teach young aviators that greatness in the air begins with discipline on the ground. That leadership is not about rank but about responsibility. That skill, no matter how refined, must always be tempered by humility. In an age where technology often dominates military conversations, Gabreski's example remains a powerful reminder that the human factor, the courage, the instinct, the will to return home, will always define aerial combat. He flew with the thunder of determination and fought with the quiet resolve of a man who knew what he stood for. Francis "Gabby" Gabreski faced the Luftwaffe's elite, went head-to-head with MiG-15s, and led fighter wings through two of the most dangerous conflicts in modern history. But through it all, he remained true to his values: courage, honor, and duty. His was a life not just of combat, but of contribution. He left behind a legacy that lives not only in records and photographs but in the hearts of all who still look to the sky with wonder, knowing that men like Gabreski once flew there, fast, fearless, and free.